Oscar. The Oscar. And I want to tell you about my life. As an American in Paris as a young man, I lived on the waterfront. And I made my living with only a gentleman's agreement, smuggling heroin, using the French Connection, and Sunrise Wings Airlines. But all of a sudden, that all stopped. When one day I was driving Miss Daisy, or Gigi, as I got to know her, and had a crash. Gigi was an American beauty. Yes, she was. An American beauty. We had originally met in Casablanca, not Morocco, out of Africa. The Hamlet, near Chicago, at a grand hotel. And I've got to tell you, the first few days I thought this is going to be the lost weekend, because she spoke of her sister incessantly. It was all about Eve, this and that. But I was truly like Shakespeare in love. We'd go to the theater and watch Oliver as the sound of music filled the theater, with My Fair Lady next to me. Or so I thought. For you see, my date had left with the departed audience. And it should be unforgiven that I had missed that small detail. For I knew Gigi had a beautiful mind, and I quickly raced out of the theater to find her. We spoke, and she was going my way, so we headed back to the apartment. She called me her midnight cowboy as I spun my exploits of travel, of going from here to eternity, of seeing the greatest show on earth at the bridge on the River Kwai, and traveling around the world in 80 days. She told me of her time taking care of a British soldier wounded during the war. The English patient left her scarred even after it was all quiet on the Western Front. Soon my brave heart allowed me to marry her, start a family, and begin a brand new career. I worked hard, and I was soon awarded a patent that gave me lots of money, and I became a man for all seasons. And what did I do with this money, you may ask? I went to the western side of town, near the Forrest Gump, and I built low-income housing. It was my $1 million baby. My tenants affectionately referred to me as the Slumdog Millionaire. But it was in this forest, next to the complex, that I first met Tom Jones, who hunted 8-pointed bucks and held dances with wolves to prove his manhood. The deer hunter and I both had an affliction for the Roman Empire. So on weekends, he would play the part of gladiator, and I of the last emperor, until that fateful day. The chariots of fire we were riding crashed into the apartment complex and burned it to the ground. There are no more Roman reenactments in that section of town anymore, and it will forever go down and be known as the West Side Story. Gigi and I soon retired, but not happily. Yes, we lived in the same house. We would sit on opposite ends of the living room with each of our own televisions turned up the whole way, listening to Seinfeld reruns. It was Kramer versus Kramer. Until that one day, yes, Gigi stood up and threw her shoes at me. One sailed over my head and hit the wall. The other one flew over the cuckoo's nest as the hour struck 4. And suddenly, all you could hear was the silence of the lambs. Yes, our pet mute lambs, Amadeus and Gandhi. We were soon divorced, and I placed Gigi on my Schindler's List. But the true victim in all this was our son. You could see it in his face. We had made our son Ben hurt. I lived a life of Emile Zola, and as I reflect on the past, the best years of our lives are spent as ordinary people. We become the godfather of one, or the godfather to several children, but are left with no country for old men. But hey, I had a good life. How green was my valley, you may ask? Let's just say there was little rain, man. I did have a few close friends that I shared my life with. I had Mrs. Minerva, who was upstairs, who I affectionately referred to as Rebecca after being divorced. We had Lawrence of Arabia, who whenever he would visit would never use coasters. So when he'd leave, we would call him Lord of the Rings, when all of the king's men were not there. And finally, my best close friend, the great Ziegfeld, who we actually just called Marty because he wasn't really that great. But it happened one night while standing in the kitchen, watching ants overpower the queen ant on top of a paper towel. Mutiny on the bounty, don't you know? I stepped upon a scorpion and died from the sting. And since you can't take it with you, I gave all my money away to charity. The funeral in Cimarron was a beautiful sight. A cavalcade of hikers marching in step like a platoon to a titanic, rocky crag as my ashes were scattered, and terms of endearment filled a valley like the Broadway melody, Annie Hall. And I was gone.